We live in challenging times, but design industries, from fashion and food to consumer tech, beauty and interiors, have shown themselves at their resilient best over the past few years. As we look to the future, this podcast explores how all creators can adapt to changing expectations and create better futures for both their businesses and their consumers. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, and your host this week. You're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. This week, I've asked three members of WGSN's consultancy team, Mindset, to talk to me about the top priorities design brands should have for 2022. Spanning North America, Asia and Europe, my three experts are used to challenging briefs from diverse brands wrestling with creating better products and experiences for their consumers. Danny Kim, a senior consultant based in New York City, Maria Arabidate, a senior consultant based in London, and Crystal Tai, a consultant based in Hong Kong, all understand design brand challenges and consumer behaviour, and are here for a quick lesson in brand resilience and planning for the coming year. So let's dive straight in. My first question, I'm going to come to Crystal on this. What are the best quick win strategies for any brand wanting to appeal to or build loyalty with the Gen Z consumer? I mean, I know, for example, in China alone, there are 320 million Gen Z consumers. So what's your advice for brands in this space, Crystal?
Well, to give you a quick overarching overview, with all the opportunities that the China market presents, there are also countless obstacles that brands are running into these days. So from technology, data privacy, as well as private enterprise. Among those, over the last few years of the pandemic especially, we've also seen the rise of guoqiao, or national trend, which involves, a new kind of Gen Z nationalism, or nationalism led by Gen Z, and which has started pushing out international competitors. However, there are some ways that brands can still connect with Gen Z consumers through the guoqiao trend. And one way is through contributing to China's cultural dialogue. So for instance, Prada in the past has done this in a respectful and serious manner through Prada Mode, which featured a collaboration with the Chinese director Jia Zhangke, as well as through panel talks and short film screenings, which they hosted via their WeChat channel. And this brought in, I think, 200,000 viewers, so it was very successful. And then coming back to China's Gen Z consumers, we find that they're less motivated by status and increasingly seeking self-expression as well as personalization. And part of this is due to the very highly competitive environment, a very stressful environment that they've been raised in which throughout the uncertainty of the pandemic and current times, they are starting to rethink their priorities and looking to follow individual dreams as well as personal aspirations.
Danny, there's a important aspect for Gen Z, and it actually is not just Gen Z, but a topic that we've talked about a lot in this podcast, we obsess about at WGSN, which is sustainability. Now, some research suggests that for Gen Z in particular, sustainable products are becoming the norm, if not mandatory. I'm not sure that's necessarily true across the entire cohort. But what can brands do to better cater to this really strong need coming out of this particular generation?
It's important to, first understand, what sustainability really means for these Gen Z consumers today. It can mean a lot of different things, and brands need to also prioritize the variance of sustainability, whether it's through a product or a service. And, from fashion and retail perspective, the transparency around where the product comes from is important. Consumers want to know how the product is made, sold, and delivered. And the clients that we work with are hyper-focused on their CSR initiatives, asking questions such as, are we doing the right thing, or is this the right way to do it? And, don't try to do everything all at once, but stick with the one that you truly believe in and action upon it, and definitely be vocal about it as well. Gen Z consumers will know right away if a brand's initiative is authentic or not. And, in order to capture their attention, the product itself also needs to have a voice that speaks to wider audience, but also shares the same values.
So from one extremely important topic to another, I was going to say buzzwords, but sustainability is definitely not a buzzword, but I potentially would put the metaverse into that category. Now, we spent all of 2021 talking about this. We were getting questions from clients all over the world about what is the metaverse? How can we use it? So, question, who shall I come to? Maria, I'm going to send this one to you.
Go on.
Is it an overriding priority for all regions, or do you think there are more immediate challenges that brands need to be worried about in 2022?
You know, it's funny that you said that the metaverse is a buzzword, because the way I see it is that you're right. It has become a bit of a marketing buzzword. And the way I speak about it with my clients, a lot of our clients are actually at the moment coming from an angle of what are we going to be doing with this massive digital wave that is moving so quickly. And the way I try to explain it to them is that do not look at the metaverse as almost a different reality, but what if you started calling it the meta economy? So starting looking at it from a point not only to engage with consumers in how to communicate, because obviously the metaverse also encapsulates things like social media or social commerce, but also how you can almost break the rules of retail and selling into something that can come in so many different ways. So it becomes almost like a whole new world of opportunities beyond what people are looking, or the way that people are looking at it at the moment, which is more like avatars, or you know, it could be even the whole idea around meta realities and gaming, etc. We need to start thinking also beyond that, and how this at the end of the day needs to become a transaction. So when I'm thinking of metaverse as an opportunity for businesses, the way I really face it to our clients is looking at it from cryptocurrencies, from a blockchain perspective, how also hearing now Danny speak, how sustainability and the metaverse are going to be intertwining, for instance. And we are going to be looking at more blockchain tracking the transparency of a product. So it can reach so many more aspects, and they can actually also almost immerse themselves. From metaverse is at the moment seen as digital only, but the reality is that metaverse is, and if we look at it from a meta economy, is how they interlinks even more with in real or physical retail. So taking both and working on them in a way that becomes even more of an omni-channel form.
I love the fact that you are looking at it and translating it for design industries as an opportunity, because I think every time there's big technological innovation, a kind of knee-jerk reaction is that fear. We're going to get left behind. We don't know what we don't know yet. And the reality is these are going to evolve. They're going to evolve. And if we can look for the good opportunities within it, you don't necessarily need to be first to market there. You can look back, see how others are utilising it. But seeing it with that positive standpoint, I think is it's a good way to go into it, especially at the beginning of the year. It's a good way to go into it. It is interesting. We looked at a recent study in the US. It said something like 43% are anxious about the metaverse. 66% are excited about its rise, but we've still got to think about that 43% and how do we handhold consumers into this, but also how do brands utilise it as a force for good. And I think you've kind of really well touched upon that. I'm going to stick with you, Maria, on this topic. You mentioned cryptocurrency in your previous answer. We predicted the crypto class to be a key cohort for 2022. Can you give us a little bit of detail into who are these key audiences, and again, how can brands leverage this cohort, which could be really useful for them?
Yeah, so speaking about Gen Z, it's interesting as well, because we're looking also at, when I look at millennials, and I was recently reading an article on millennial spending and millennial millionaires, and actually nearly half of millennial millionaires have at least 25% of the wealth in cryptocurrencies. And if we're looking also even at Gen Z, we are seeing that 59% believe they could become wealthy by investing in cryptocurrency. At the moment, since it's coming, and originally it came obviously from, like, we're looking at it from a gaming perspective, or also as you just called it as well, the crypto class, it tends to be younger generations looking at this new ways of investment. But we're saying that, but it's moving so quickly. So even MasterCard, I believe it was in October, they announced that they're going to be creating a new loyalty program where instead of getting points for your spending, you will get a form of cryptocurrency. So it's moving so quickly and becoming mass and so quickly adopted that brands are going to have to almost keep a really close eye on this. To that point as well, you mentioned also when we're looking also at that, again, around the message of crypto and also the different audiences in it. What's interesting as well is that because it is moving so quickly and it's actually almost, we could say, driven by the creator economy. And again, this millennials, Gen Zers, all the people that really create content, all these new currencies are appearing really quickly. So it's almost something that I would say is a little bit more long term if we're thinking of 2022, but thinking and keeping an eye on these new currencies that are emerging is going to be so key.
So you've kind of you've touched on something quite interesting in there, which is this kind of tension between short-term pains and gains, but also longer-term thinking. Let's focus in on the fashion industry just for a moment. Danny, the fashion brands that you work with, are they looking at immediate issues when they're thinking about evolving and adjusting their businesses, or is the thinking longer term at the moment? I'm very conscious we can't say we're coming out of a pandemic at the moment. It's still, causing huge issues all across the globe. But how is that tension being played out in the fashion businesses that you're talking to?
Right. I mean, and just looking at your questions, I think it's a little bit of both. Fashion brands now, have figured out sort of a way to quickly react to a certain trend that they see, whether it's from a supply chain perspective or have that data-driven information early on in the advance. And, a lot of clients we work with now want sort of trends that have some kind of a data-backed resources. Fashion trend is no longer just about what we see on the runway or in the streets of Europe. It's much more deeper than that. And as we look at the trend curve or even retail data, we build that confidence to our clients where they can, prepare themselves better in long term. And these viable data can support their business strategies, both short term and long term. And the concern today isn't so much about, is a certain trend within fashion going to show up within 6 months or in 1 year, but rather it's really focused on the validity of the trend and how much of an impact it's going to have to their business based on the history of data collected.
It is, for someone like myself who's been in the fashion industry, out of the fashion industry, back again in my career, seeing how sometimes fashion industry have been quite slow to adopt things, but when they do, they embrace it wholeheartedly. And I think it was initially, again, we're talking about that kind of fear factor, it was felt that it could completely obliterate creativity. And actually what we've seen is really innovative brands who are more creative than they ever have been by including data into their creative process. It's definitely something that at WGSN we are capturing and ensuring that we arm them with both sides of that. So the qual and the quant, the kind of expert and the analytical. And that is fascinating for me, seeing, different brands at kind of different steps in that journey. Crystal, can you talk about how that plays out in APAC? Maybe not necessarily in fashion, but what are the challenges that are really facing those markets, and especially, brands trying to address consumer expectations in places like China and Korea, as an example?
It's actually been fascinating because while K-pop, K-beauty, all things K-related continue to gain relevance across much of the world, we find that Korean cultural imports and products are actually losing momentum in one of its biggest former markets, which is China. But then looking at North America, where thanks to groups like BTS, K-pop is being considered mainstream by now. There's actually been a lot of considerable growth as well. One area one case study that's been really interesting has been the rise of Squid Game, for instance. on Netflix. So apparently, APAC represents Netflix's biggest opportunity for growth at the moment. And one way that they're targeting this market is actually through looking at the discarded ideas from local TV. So in South Korea, there are a lot of taboos for local television. For instance, like sex, violence, cultural taboos as well. And so a lot of pitches are rejected, and Netflix then goes to these local producers, local screenwriters, and has been putting together a lot of innovative new projects that target more taboo themes, including social inequality and politics. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really interesting, that idea that as the rest of the world adopts cultural trends, or actually any kind of trends coming out of Asia Pacific, those countries have kind of moved on now, and it's, you know, this idea that maybe in the past the kind of Western world was leading, very much a kind of follower at the moment, and looking to the East for those new cultural phenomena that actually might have been, you know, part and parcel of people's culture, you know, for decades before. But it also speaks to that movement in a world where we are much more curtailed by where we are. There has been so much less travel over the past couple of years. And there was that feeling early on that people were going to look inwards, but we are still looking outwards. We want to be inspired. We want something that feels new, even if it's not new from where it's come from, but that it's new to us and kind of give us new ways of expressing our own creativity, new products and new experiences as well. So talking about new experiences, we've all as individuals had to reconsider space around us, how we live our lives. Urban life has completely changed during this pandemic. And one of the areas that has felt the biggest impact from that is obviously bricks and mortar retail. Maria, what should businesses be prioritising in this area as those kind of big migratory shifts are still in flux at the moment when they're thinking about luring people into their old stores at the moment? What should they be considering?
I think most important, and again, going back to what we always, our clients are constantly coming to us, especially so many stores have closed down from the clients we had at WGSN, and the re-strategizing. And the key message for me is Q-commerce, so quick commerce. I mean, especially in Europe, if you think about it, Milan is creating more a 15-minute city, and they've called it the super block. And we're thinking of the city in as such as blocks. Madrid, Barcelona are doing the same. Paris, again, the Champs-Élysées is getting, again, all pedestrianized. So thinking of new ways of how the flagship is not necessarily going to have to be that big. You may be able, and this can take, again, so many different shapes and forms, but the flagship is not necessary, at least in the locations that we would expect them to be. So again, when we're thinking of neighborhoods, when we're thinking of suburbs, a lot of us have moved outside of city centers, thinking of from, it could be a vending machine all the way to, it could be, for example, a pop-up store in a very remote location. I mean, Prada did Prada Outdoors recently, last year. So looking at new ways in which you can really help the consumer benefit, not only from your product, but even your services, because a lot of this retail spaces are becoming more service driven since the product can be bought online. So it's all about providing that additional benefit of having to go in store is going to be so key.
I think just before this podcast started recording, we were talking about how lots of our world seem very, very small at the moment. And I think any way of helping people feel that the world isn't so small, even if they're not travelling, I would certainly be welcoming that right now as someone who, very cliched, did move out of a big city during this pandemic. So to wrap things up, I'm going to come to all three of you and ask you to just talk briefly about a particular topic that you've seen emerging in the conversations that you're having with creatives and buyers, merchandisers, innovation teams, that you think will be really important topics and things that all brands should be considering in 2022. Danny, I'll come to you first.
Yeah. So earlier, we spoke about Gen Z and, how brands are hyper-focused on targeting to these consumers. What we are starting to hear more is about the alpha generation, the next generation post-Gen Z. Marketing towards the alpha generation is quickly approaching. And there's not a ton of information out there on alpha because they're still too young to have that impact on spending power. But globally, there will be over 2 billion alphas by 2025. And, from influencer strategies to products and services focused on the next generation, this is the next topic the companies are wanting to know more about. We'll even start to hear more about Gen Z parents as they start to enter into the workforce and the adulthood. So the next step is for the brands to prepare themselves for what's coming and how to react quickly to capture this market share to win.
That's a really good point, although it's making me feel very old as you're saying that. Crystal, coming to you next.
So going back to the topic of the metaverse, I've noticed that clients are very curious about how best to engage with this emerging new space. One in particular actually asked me how real-world physical items and products are being manifested within the metaverse. And I thought that was a great question. So we talked a bit about realm estate, or the emergence of virtual real estate and how consumers are buying that up. NFTs, of course, virtual artworks. And also with the pandemic, how a lot of formerly offline events and festivals, such as Complex Land, have moved to being hosted on in the virtual world, in virtual spaces, where attendees and visitors can create their own avatars and then purchase actual clothing for their avatars, as well as other products, and other recent collaborations like the North Face and Gucci drop for avatar clothing on Pokemon Go, which was a really fun new way of exploring the metaverse as well.
Yeah, we should be playing bingo with this. How many times we're going to say the metaverse in less than 25 minutes, and we knew it would be pretty high in there. Maria, you can talk to us about metaverse or a different topic.
Actually, I'm going to be speaking, rather than looking at it from the metaverse, if you do have a retail store, how can you bring that experience that everyone is expecting in the digital, the digital world, into your physical space? So I would say take inspiration from, again, looking back at neighborhoods, looking back at hyperlocality, how you can really personalize the experience based on the location. There's definitely a lot of opportunity that can go that way, and also with the help of digitalization. So think of just more personalized shopping behaviors emerging and how you can really feed into those in store.
Thank you so much to Maria, Danny and Crystal for joining me this week, and thank you too for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, then please subscribe to the show, which is available on all major podcast platforms. And if you really like what you heard, then please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. If you're interested in what we've been talking about today, then please head over to WGSN.com, where you can find out how you can access all of our insight and analysis. Thank you again to my guests, and I'd also like to thank our podcast producers, Bethan Ryder and Roland Bodenham, and thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay well and healthy, and look forward to chatting to you again soon.